over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ken and Craig, for inviting me. I'm super excited to be here. I'm a bit croaky today, so forgive me if I splutter every now and again. I'm hoping through this talk, to invite you to extend a little bit the potential of the thinking embedded in circular economy, all the concepts and the practice. And I wanted to do this in sort of three ways. So the first way is really to think about the design challenges and to think about circulation of intangibles as well as tangibles, which I think is really important. Think about what we need at local level for a different way of living, and to design for things that are happening globally in the context of right now and in the future, because I think these things are all interlinked. And I think that the circular economy system sits within other systems. And I think that the more we can zoom in and zoom out to those bigger challenges, the more successful we'll be. So one of the things you mentioned just before the break was around the commons and the sort of thinking around that. And this was a quote from The Guardian in 2015, which really spoke to me at the time and really sort of captured some of the thoughts I was having around, for common style thinking to take hold, we need to move beyond quaint notions of the gift economy and engage in systemic restructuring. And I think that at that moment, 2015, there was a lot of, I don't know what you could call it. I think we're still captured by it a little bit at the moment, which is that we see examples and small examples, and we sort of, I'm trying to think of the right word. We sort of not glamorize them, but we love them so much that we don't see the shortcomings of some of those smaller activities. I'm not expressed that very well, but I'm sure you kind of know what I mean. So with this in mind, I just wanted to talk through very briefly, well, as briefly as I can, the work that we've been doing in Barking and Dagenham to build these kind of systemic restructuring approach. And a lot of this comes from work that I've been working on this for 14 years now. And I think it's taken by 2024, there'll have been around 13 million pounds invested in developing this approach, and really at the moment looking to see how this approach can be applied into the sort of global issues that we're looking at the moment. So it's called Everyone Every Day, and it's exactly sort of what it says on the tin. We were trying through the name to encourage this inclusive thinking, but also thinking about this kind of activity being built into everyday life rather than it being for some people some of the time, or it being extraordinary and heroic. We wanted right from the beginning for it to be seen as something that is for everybody. It's in Barking and Dagenham in East London, and it's a place of a rich heritage, but it's also the 12th most deprived in England out of the 326 local councils. So it is a very challenging area to do this kind of work, but has been helpful in really figuring out what it's going to take to put this kind of idea into reality. Essentially, sorry, I'm getting croakier by the second. Can you all hear me still? Sorry.
Yes, yes.
Just tell me if I'm not. So essentially what we've developed is a two-system model where we have a platform which has infrastructures which support a large number of people doing a large number of activities. And for some reason, my notes aren't coming up. 1 second. Can you hang on 1 second for me? Technical difficulty.
No problem.
It's weird because I had my notes up just only moments ago. That's what technology is like, isn't it? It plays tricks on you. I'll just go ahead. So essentially what we've done, instead of looking at how neighborhoods are organized at the moment across this country and across many countries, are that the funding system supports the emergence of many small-scale micro-organizations. Many of them aren't funded for very long and aren't very resilient. So for example, over the last 10 or 15 years, the National Lottery, the Community Lottery Fund has given out billions of pounds to communities across the country, but 98% of those have been under £10,000. So they're not significantly changing things. So what we've been trying through this model is to say, what happens if we create a central support system of funding, of spaces, materials, facilitation, design capacity, rather than asking people to become smaller organizations? Can we make that a much more inclusive entry point? Because of the existing system, we're looking at maybe 10 or 15% of the most confident and time-rich people who would get involved in community activity at neighborhood level. So we've been testing this idea for the last 5 years. And so how the platform works is, this is what it looks like. I always show this slide because just to highlight the fact that this approach is a very joy-filled approach. People are here because they want to be here, not because they're being targeted for having difficulties, but because they have capabilities. And we invite them into very joyful, beautiful spaces where people are really doing amazing work. So these photos show some of the systems that we've built. And essentially the key components of the platform, we have a physical spaces and equipment, we have a co-creation team, and we have shared operational support across all of them, including communications. So if I showed you what the sort of a diagram version of it is sorry, the people pictures is covering up some of the words I'm looking at. Never mind. And more technical difficulties. But this is Barking and Dagenham. We have 5 shop spaces which are on the high street, which are basically project incubation spaces, and a large public warehouse, which is a makerspace, which operates like a library. So it's not run on a membership model. We're testing how making that sort of capability accessible to everyone, how that works. And each of the shops actually have sort of different elements of makerspace in them. The Barking shop has kitchens, shared community kitchens. Some of the shops have plastic recycling and sewing workshops and things like that. So it's really looking at these different infrastructures. This is the Barking shop. This is the Marks Gate shop. So in essence, what we've got is a sort of neighborhood level, which are the shop project incubators, including sharing fridges, shared kitchens and canteens. And that's, yes, and that's for sort of community level activity and workshops. And then we've been testing out the idea of trying to create these mini platforms at street level so that a number of projects can be started within a different street. And those have all been codified from projects which have been designed and tested during the time in Barking and Dagenham and in the previous project. So we're trying to create infrastructure at these different levels. That's what it looks like at the street level. And then we've got this public maker space, which is, I'll show you another picture of that in a second. So this is what it looks like inside. So it's 3,000 square feet of spaces, which include event spaces, ceramics workshops, print workshops, wood and plastics workshops. We've got a mini maker space for children with the intention that they become makers as early on as possible, and that they can make alongside their parents fabric workshops and so on. So it's a much bigger facility than we ever imagined. We got the space we were looking, as you can imagine, for a space, and the council were master planning this area. So we got it, and we got a grant from City of London to do this, but it is much more of an operational challenge than we had intended at the beginning. In the back, there is IKEA gave us a garden which they used at the Chelsea Flower Show, which I have to tell you has been an absolute nightmare to reconstruct for a whole host of reasons. And if anyone wants to give me some therapy on saying yes to everything, please do let me know through the comments. And then we've also been experimenting with trying to stimulate cooperative businesses. So essentially thinking about what's essential and what and how do we just grow that with residents. And it's been incredibly challenging trying to do that in an inclusive way. So meeting people where they are, and instead of doing sort of business incubation where you make it competitive so that the most able, or not the most able, but the most ready, I should say, people get chosen to take part in those incubators. What we're trying to do is make those incubation processes inclusive for anyone, even if they don't have the skills or ideas, but they have the will to do that. What's happened in reality is we've had a very female-dominated process, which is good in lots of ways. We've had, part of that has been because it's also been co-designed by women. In the process that we co-design everything as much as possible with residents. But it's been a very interesting exploration and thinking about how residents work, not just between projects, of which we have many, but also across these sort of collaborative brands that we've been testing. But the idea really is, as many of you will know, that and I'm rounding up the numbers here, but 75% of startups fail, individual startups, but co-ops have a similar success rate. That does vary across the world. I know sometimes it goes up as high as 80 or 85% with co-ops. So thinking about, we've always named it a collaborative business program for that reason. So this is one example. We started a coffee shop, but this, interestingly, was in collaboration with the developer, which is very near the warehouse makerspace. And it's kind of really important, we think, to start building those relationships with commercial organizations. They could easily have tried to get in Pret a Manger or Costa Coffee or something like that, but actually growing it from the ground up with residents. None of them had made a cup of coffee before. Well, special machine made coffee. I'm sure they made coffee before, but we trained them up to be a co-op, but we also trained them to do the skills. And that's something which the housing developer has contributed to because there isn't the population there currently to make an independent coffee shop viable at this stage. But growing from the ground up has been really important, and they've actually recently got an award for that. And these are complicated arrangements to make with developers. One of the things that we've noticed is that when we work with more commercial organizations, they're very often, those partnerships are being led by quite adventurous and inspiring individuals. And very often it's quite hard for that to translate over time to different people in the organization. So these things are not easily done. Even though I'm showing you nice pictures, there's a hell of work behind them. And these are all still in development. None of these things are necessarily rock solid at the moment. They are very much in a sort of research and development phase. This was another initiative we did last year with the government's initiative to work with apprenticeships with young people, and we did a pop-up shop called the Good House in Barking in Dagenham High Street. I think I need to talk a bit faster. So just a word on the ecosystem element of it. So what we're trying to do, rather than having a whole landscape of mini organizations, what we're trying to do is have an ecosystem which includes people coming in to the borough, leaving the borough, but actually the actual projects being really reliable. But actually the activity can change. So we have projects which go dormant, which takes into account the fact that, people in Barking and Dagenham, many of them have very difficult lives. We've had projects go dormant because people have got divorced, or they've had health issues, or they're caring for other people. And this system really allows for dormancy, but also for replication within the borough and elsewhere. So we see it as a living, breathing ecosystem, and one which we hope will be constantly refreshed, rather than sort of ossified, which it can do. And in the middle of that system is people and their capabilities. So a lot of the systems that we work to at the moment are very much built around people's needs and services. And this whole methodology really builds on the idea that there are things that people can do between each other, with each other, that services can't do. Services can't create cohesion, it can't build trust. It's actually what happens between people and those friendships that result from getting to know one another and being in the same spaces together. So one of the things that came out of the work that we did during COVID really was to sort of think about, really hone in on what essentials there are to living, and started to think about trying to make those as universal as possible, and how they might be, they might fit within the donut economics model, where there are constraints on what we do, but the things that are essential to us actually become much more equality around that. And so one of the ideas around the cooperative shops is also this idea that you may have a sort of an essentials clothing shop at the front end, and maybe a workshop for repairing and sharing at the back end. But it's also recognizing that not everybody has the time or the inclination to repair, but actually those that want to can have the access to it. And this is really what the maker spaces and the shops are doing, is actually trying to make that circular economy accessible to people who are at the moment, I think, being locked out of it. It's actually quite expensive to live a circular life right now. And we want to make that as inclusive as possible so that it's for everybody, and we have access for everybody. So just looking at the food system, we also see this as also very different levels, but actually having this as a way of life rather than having a borough with a few examples, actually seeing this stuff happening on many, many streets at street level, having sufficient resource in housing estates and in smaller neighborhoods. So the idea is that if you were on a housing estate, there should be places where you can batch cook together, where you can grow things together, where you can eat together, repair things, share things, etc. So actually diffusing this kind of infrastructure really, really locally, so that it's sort of so widespread. So and we have obviously been making significant progress on this, but it is still it's still challenging, and it's still, it's not cheap to do this. It's really thinking about the investments required. The other project that we've initiated, which is being relaunched quite soon, is called the Open Making Society. And this is the idea of having those essential items designed and ready for open manufacture in a system like the one we're creating. So, the notion that you might be able to, and some of you may fall off your chairs laughing when I say this, but this is just really a metaphor for it, but the idea that you could take plastic bottles into your local everyday shop, and you could walk out with a toothbrush which had been designed as an open access project. So we would like to continue to create this sort of global directory of goods and products which we think are essential for everyday life, that people can make in an infrastructure like this. And one of the other ways of looking at it is really looking at it as a sort of this is an analysis, which is a sort of co-production continuum with lots of citizen co-production on the left-hand side and lots of professional services on the right-hand side, and seeing where the gaps are. So there's a lot of household infrastructure in people's houses, and there's lots of specialist infrastructure through specialist services and so on, and actually thinking about what's the shared public infrastructure. We're trying to create that at these different levels that enables cooperatives to be incubated, but also this sort of large scale practical everyday work that's carrying on. And this is really just briefly to show you that all these examples exist in the world. You know, there are public open orchard, there are batch cooking, there's public beehives, there's hydroponic co-ops, there's bakery co-ops. You know, these exist in the world. And really, so there's so much has been invented that what we're trying to see is what happens, and what happens if all of those are brought into one place. You know, how can it change life? And all of these innovations are extraordinary, but they are fragmented and all over the world. So thinking about how can we stimulate the expansion of that, but in a dense collection of those, to see what that is. Future Food, this was another project that we started working with residents. This was something that I'm sure you know, hydroponics, you need considerable investment. The hydroponics farm that I visited in Montreal has enormous challenges just in terms of plant hygiene and irrigation and all these things. So there's a lot of technical issues around a lot of these things. And then I just really wanted to, talk about 7 essentials for circular everything. This is according to me. I'm sure you may have many different ones and many of your own. But before I touch on that, I just really wanted to just touch as well on this idea of the global context. And I think that we talk about trying to avert global warming and so on. We all know that it's actually happening at the moment. I think the latest figures I saw was the US now averages $1 billion disaster every 18 days. And I think the reality is that we are looking at a global mass migration connected to global warming that is already currently in place. And I think one of the challenges we have when we talk about circular economy is a lot of the time we're trying to retrofit existing systems and trying to look at those material flows, but there are going to be hundreds of new cities built from scratch. And I think that there is a great opportunity there to thinking about how do we build them circular right from the word go. And because retrofitting by its very nature is extraordinarily complex, I think the work that we've been doing in Barking and Dagenham has been challenging because of the amount of different people that you need to work with who speak different languages, whether they're planners or developers or social workers. There's so many different people who have a different viewpoint. And I think that building cities from scratch is going to be an incredibly interesting area of work. The other figure is that with every degree of temperature increase, roughly 1 billion people will be pushed outside the zone in which humans have lived for thousands of years. So, you know, this is a moving system that we're working in. And I think that in terms of circular economy, we also need to think about circulation of people and labor as well as goods, because circulation of goods is really well set up across the world, not circular, but pretty efficient. And we need to sort of start thinking about that in terms of labor and migration as well. So the 7 essentials for circular everything. What time is it? It is 10:55. I'm going to stop talking in a minute now. You'll sigh relief. So again, just thinking about intangibles as well as tangibles, you know, the circulation of people's talents, their knowledge, their friendship, these are incredibly important to well-being, the building of social cohesion, particularly in light of a migrating world. So circulation of those things is incredibly important, and in lots of ways the work that we've been doing in Barking and Dagenham could be viewed as a large learning ecosystem, because there's so much knowledge sharing going on through nearly every one of those projects. Co-creation as well as services. I think that the idea that citizens are co-producers with us, with professionals, and they can do things that services can't do. So I think that co-creation is really important in thinking about how the circular economy flourishes at neighborhood level. That infrastructure that supports human circularity. So the physical infrastructure that we've built is so important, but ultimately it supports connection between people. And so it is incredibly important. The tangible and the intangibles need to work together to make this whole system refreshed. So open source everyday needs, access to circularity needs to be inclusive. I mentioned that already, but I think that making circular economy and sustainable living such a middle class, Waitrose type of affair really discounts all the people that really care about it. So you don't have to be middle class to care about the environment, to worry about the future. So I think giving people full access to the means of contributing to the circular economy and to environmental projects is an important thing, just even for mental health reasons. And then transdisciplinary fusion applied to designing. I think that transdisciplinary work is incredibly difficult again, but it is really essential. So it is really important. I think that we broaden out the disciplinary design aspects as widely as possible as we work. Whole system demonstration. So what we haven't really done is actually shown what a whole system looks like in a single place and put all those innovations I was talking to you about, putting them together in one place. So we've made enormous headway in Barking and Dagenham, but actually there is still scope for an enormous amount of innovations to be brought together to see what it would actually look like. So we get tied up a lot about how do we visualize this future vision, how do we communicate that, and we've tried really hard, and then I think that we will get to a point where we actually have to build it and show what it's about, and be able to walk around it. So I remember when we were fundraising for Barking and Dagenham, I was trying to get all the 5 years funding up front before we started as a sort of security. And at a certain point, I realized that we got as far as we could do on paper. So we visualized it on paper as much as and as clearly as possible. But it's only when people can come and walk around it and see people together, what the spaces feel like, what residents are saying, that they can really, really understand it fully. So I think there is a need to really pull all of those circular economy and other innovations together into one place to show what we can do. And then something which I'm not sure I believed in wholeheartedly that long ago, but I do think that bold visionary leadership is needed, and it needs to be from everybody. You know, we need to create a culture where everyone can feel like they are leading, and actually leading, not just feeling like they're leading. And this is a photo which I like very much. This is the president of Puerto Rico in the early 50s. And on a certain day, they decided to stop all funding in the military. So they went from, I don't know what budget, to zero in one day. And they transferred that funding over to their education department. And this is a bit of political theatre where the president took a mallet to the what's it called, the Ministry of Defence. And what I find so incredible is that this, you know, somebody walked into a room of cabinet ministers, or cabinet ministers walked into a room and said, we should stop funding the military. And, you know, can you imagine the extraordinary response to that? But actually to have a whole cabinet and government support that kind of initiative. And for, you know, decades later, we're now more than 70 years after that, successive governments haven't tried to wipe away that legacy. They have built on that legacy. And I do think it's an incredibly inspiring thing. And that sort of visionary leadership, we're not seeing that much. The most recent example I can think of is Patagonia, which is pretty incredible. But that's what we need, and we need to find it in ourselves to do some of this, and not wait for politicians who are so not competent at the moment to do this sort of stuff for us. So that's it. That's me. Thank you very much for listening.